Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. This could be a little bit of a boring topic, but every one of us has to deal with risk and compliance, so I'll try to make it interesting to tell you how we are approaching it at Atlassian. So it's not only a boring topic, but we have to go through an audit. And I don't know, is that how you feel before or after an audit, but it's not really a pleasant experience, so that's what we are trying to address as well. So when we started establishing the risk and compliance function 3 years ago, we asked ourselves exactly what we are trying to do. And we decided that we have to deliver not just a simple compliance, but a compliance delivery system. Because in the modern days, you have to deal with SOX, you have to deal with ISO 27000, you have to deal with SOC 2, there's a slew of standards that you have to deploy. So we were looking for a system that will allow us to deploy and manage those standards. So we looked at what is the standard approach? Spreadsheets, Word documents. That definitely is not going to cut it. We established a list of criteria for that system. It had to be efficient, it had to be scalable, low cost, and very easy to use. So spreadsheets and documents doesn't cover any one of those. Then we looked at specialized tools. You know, there are a lot of GRC tools that allow you to manage risk and compliance. And they're pretty good. They're very specialized. They do a pretty good job in that. But they're kind of unwieldy in the environment that we are. And also, they were very expensive. Then we started talking to other companies around us, friendly companies. We actually had a few presentations and we looked at their specialized deployments. And then the light bulb came in. We said, OK, we actually have everything necessary to build our own GRC system that will satisfy all those requirements that we put together. So first of all, we got vanilla JIRA. Very simple. You take JIRA, regular JIRA deployment. Then vanilla Confluence, as you get it out of the box. We gathered several GRC experts, and we started designing this. So it took us about a week. Mind you, none of us is a JIRA or Confluence expert. So there is nothing really complicated in that. Then we designed it for about a week, and then we started deploying it. And in the agile spirit, we're consistently improving it. So we're still working on this. So this is our approach. First of all, we thought about compliance objects. What are the things that we use in compliance? We have a standard, ISO 27001, ISO 27018, SOX, different type of standard. So that's one object. According to that standard, we have different control objectives. For example, managing access, managing backup and recovery, managing change. So those are our objectives. And then we went down the list. For each of the objectives, we have different activities. We're doing control tests periodically. That's the audit I was referring to. We have findings, we have remediations, and so on and so forth. And we said, for each of those objects, we are going to assign a JIRA type, issue type for JIRA, for each one of them. And then we talked about the workflow. So each one of those objects goes through a lifecycle. For example, if you have a finding, that finding first has to be confirmed, then there is a decision made, then we have a remediation, or we just accept the finding. So that's the lifecycle for the finding. And that's what we did for each of those objects. And we define what are the stages and what are the transitions. So this is essentially a workflow in JIRA terms. Then we start thinking about the links. OK, so we have a standard. That standard is linked to a number of objectives. Those objectives are linked to a number of control activities, and so on and so forth. And that's how we define the links within JIRA. And then we found out that JIRA is very good for workflow and for issue management, but if you want to have rich documents where you have long control narratives with diagrams and things, that's not really JIRA's strength. However, that is perfect for Confluence. So for some of those control activities, we actually use Confluence. And we had the linkage between the JIRA and Confluence activity. And then we started looking at other systems because, for example, if you perform an audit, there are evidence for that audit that sits outside of JIRA, outside of Confluence in some kind of third-party system. So again, we started using linkages to JIRA, regular URL linkages. And then we started utilizing the dashboards. In fact, there are quite a lot of built-in dashboards within JIRA that you can use right off the box. For example, you can look at all of your control activities, who are the control owners. You can look at all the findings, who are those findings. And by the way, when we're talking about links, everything in Atlassian is based on JIRA tickets. So for example, even if I go to legal team and I have a request from the legal team, they have their own JIRA queue. The beauty of this is that we can link our tickets within the GRC system with the tickets with the business teams that are operating on. So for example, if I have a finding, the remediation for that finding is in the queue of someone who is actually responsible for that remediation. And then we started integrating within Confluence. For example, our risk and control matrices are in Confluence. So when the auditor comes in, I show them a page with all the controls and the control owners there. And you can become even more sophisticated. For example, this is a snapshot of our audit plan, which is based on JIRA. So all of our control tests are in JIRA, they're planned, and that's how it is presented within Confluence. For each of audit, we have the control tests, and we have actually we have individual control tests for each of the audits. So an audit, then, essentially, is epic in JIRA terms. So a few use cases, how we actually utilize this. First of all, for policies. All of our policies are in Confluence, because that allows for the rich text documents I was talking about. However, the management of the lifecycle for a policy is within JIRA. So we have a workflow for each of the policies, and we know when the policy is up for review. We know who reviewed it and when is the next time it's going to be reviewed. Policy exceptions are actually in JIRA Service Desk. So on top of the regular JIRA that we use for the GRC, we put the JIRA Service Desk, and that's where people can file policy exception requests. So in our queues, we have policy exception requests that also go to a particular life cycle. Another example is how we manage audits. So for each control test, we have subtasks for the particular audit. So an audit is an epic. And then the other thing that we're doing with our auditors, it took a while, but we actually trained them. They enter the request for evidence in JIRA. So that's another type of issue in JIRA. So it goes through a life cycle, and I can link it. So next year, when we do the audit, I can actually look at what are the documents that the auditors requested previous year, and I can follow through. All the findings that come from the audits are, of course, entered in the GRC system, and they're linked to the queues that teams are working from to remediate those issues. The beauty there is that because every one of us is working from a queue, they do not distinguish whether that's a remediation coming from a compliance audit or whether that's a bug that they have to fix in the software or something else to do. They're just following through the queue. And we're just started using the GRC system for risk management. So another issue type that we enter there is risk, and we have risk drivers, and they're linked to the controls, to the findings, and so on and so forth. So it's one integrated system that we have. So we ended up with something that is very efficient, and it can grow with the company. It can expand. We can add new standards. We can add new control activities to it. We can open up to other things, for example, risk management. And we're actually looking at integrated within our vendor management as well. For example, IT is using JIRA for asset management. We're integrating with that one. It's a relatively low cost. So we don't even have any plugins at this point. Although we're looking at some plugins, at this point, we don't have any plugins in this system. It's a plain vanilla. We're not using any experts to actually modify the regular JIRA and Confluence system. It is adding a new fields and making those linkages between the issue types. It's relatively easy. None of us is a JIRA expert, and we're using it, and we keep upgrading it. So bottom line is, if you like that before and after the audit, you should really think about using JIRA and Confluence, especially if you have it already deployed within the environment. Any questions?